How's it going, everybody? So, VidCon's still going on. I left, but there's something significantly more interesting, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Maajid Nawaz. I'm founder of Quilliam, a radio broadcaster, columnist, and counter-extremism activist.
The fascinating thing, I guess, to a lot of people who watch me and a lot of people, you coined the term regressive left.
Yeah, for my sins, yeah.
For your sins?
Yeah. No, I did. 2012 in my autobiography, Radical, I used the word regressive left to describe those on the left who I believe are culturally relativist, who harbour a bigotry of low expectations to people that look like me or from my cultural background, and don't implement or don't call for the consistent implementation of universal liberal values across the spectrum.
Do you want to give a quick background to who you are and what you do outside of Quilliam and other things?
So Quilliam, we founded about 9 years ago as the world's first counter-extremism organisation. The reason that we got to that point is because at 16 years old I joined an Islamist organisation known as Hizb ut-Tahrir. It was among the first to popularise the notion ideologically among Muslims that we must resurrect a caliphate. And I spent all of my teenage years up until the age of 24 proselytizing for the resurrection of a caliphate from the leadership of that organization. That led me to Egypt, and in 2002 I was arrested, sentenced to 5 years as a political prisoner in Egypt for inciting against the Egyptian regime on behalf of that organization. Sentenced to 5 years, adopted by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience. Served my full sentence. During my time in prison, I read a lot, debated a lot, mixed with a whole ideological spectrum of political prisoners, and ended up changing my ideological convictions to a point where when I was released and returned to the UK, I spent, which has been the better part of the last decade, challenging the Islamist ideology from within Muslim communities and pushing back against this ideological indoctrination coming from Islamists and their bedfellows, the regressive left.
Wow,
that's what the autobiography Radical is about. It was in that context I mentioned the phrase, because I said I grew up being chased by neo-Nazi skinheads in Essex, where I was born in the United Kingdom, and I never expected. These are the days, by the way, where think of what was going on abroad in Europe. There was a genocide against Muslims in Bosnia. And domestically, there was some serious, severe racism, not just coming from neo-Nazis, but also within our police forces. And this was, officially, the government declared that there was institutional racism in the police forces. These are the bad old days of racism in the UK. I grew up facing threats and violence from the far right. I never expected it from those who used to claim to fight in my defense when I was a teenager, those who were my allies. I expected them to support my universal liberal values, and I never saw those attacks coming. And so it was treachery. I felt a real betrayal of what I call the minorities within the minority communities. The left claim they want to fight for and defend minority values, and there's this other phrase I talk about often. I speak about the minorities within the minorities, because those who are truly vulnerable, and if we're going to judge any society by how it treats its most vulnerable, and if that's where we gain our sense of worth and value from, then if we're going to care about our minorities, then we should be really looking for those who are truly vulnerable, and that's the minorities within those minorities, and that's gay Muslims, feminist Muslims, liberal Muslims, ex-Muslims, dissenting voices. These are people that are being murdered within their own communities in blasphemy cases in Pakistan. They are the real vulnerable voices that we should be defending.
What's interesting is that when I hear your story, it sounds to me more that all of this, whether you're on the left or the right, it's just about winning. It's about your side having the upper hand or being right.
Yeah.
And for you to actually have been involved with Islamists and this extremist ideology, to now be attacked by the left, I think, what I'm alluding to now is this announcement you made recently. Do you want to explain what happened?
Yeah, so I've just, this is my first interview after my appearance on the Bill Maher Show.
Thank you.
That's all right, it's a pleasure. You come highly recommended. I was top of the hour guest on Bill Maher's show, and we spoke about an announcement that I made on that show. Because since I've been doing this work for over a decade, I was, as I said, not expecting the attack from the left.
So what was the attack?
Well, highly personal, ad hominem, highly defamatory, the attack has come not from one quarter, but generally from a bunch of people who are positioned to the left, the left of centre, and there are certain words that are used, right? So the left, again, a portion of it, not all of it, call them the regressive left. Often, generally though, the left speaks about wanting to allow people like me from my background to speak for ourselves. They say often, and you've heard this before, those who speak about social justice talk of how you can never experience my experiences. You can never put yourself in my shoes, right? You don't truly know the grievances I've suffered that have formed the personality that is me now, and therefore let me speak to my own truth, because I have my own truth, and don't, you obviously hear this a lot, right? I can see you smiling when I say this.
Well, because I'm unless your truth counters the narrative they've been pushing, right?
Well, so the point is now, if that's the case, exactly as you've just said, right? So they say this often. Well, all right, fair enough, guys. Speak to my experiences. This is my truth. Every single grievance you claim that you want to defend because of people like me, people of color who are Muslims in the war on terror, growing up in facing severe racism, every single grievance that you say that you want to allow people like me to express, and that's our truth. Well, I can check all of those. You talk about violent racism. I've been there. You talk about being caught up in the war on terror. I've witnessed torture in Egyptian jails as a Muslim imprisoned for my beliefs. You talk about being profiled at airports. I've had my DNA taken from me at Heathrow Airport. I've been told that my Miranda rights don't apply under Schedule 7 of the 2000 Terrorism Act in the UK. The right to silence is a criminal offence in ports of entry and exit. So at Heathrow, I'm told that if you don't answer these questions, it's a criminal offence. I've had all of this done to me. I epitomise every single grievance that people on the left say is what angers Islamists, right? I epitomise those and became an Islamist as a result. And yet now, when I speak against the Islamist ideology, having positioned myself firmly on the centre-left of politics, having stood as a Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate in the United Kingdom, merely because the conclusions I come to after all of these experiences don't meet the dogma that those on the regressive left are insisting that I should speak to, suddenly my conclusions become invalid and I'm an Uncle Tom, a native informant. What that tells me, by the way, when we talk about the bigotry of low expectations, it tells me that they don't even confer to me the compliment of having my own agency to think for myself and come to my own conclusions. And if that's not racism, what is?
What's crazy is that the people on the left, they say all the time that most Muslims, they don't believe in this terror. They're just regular people trying to live their lives. Like you said, you epitomize this. I would imagine they would say, look to this guy and let him talk about, his experiences and how he came, to better understand and hear what he has to say. But instead, it's what they call you an extremist. Is it?
So it started with words that are actually racially loaded, such as Uncle Tom and native informant, because they imply lack of agency on behalf of people of color to come to their own conclusions. And by the way, I'm still centre-left in my politics. I'm a liberal. I do distinguish between the left and liberals, and so I'm more of a centre-leftist rather than a far leftist. But it is a denial of agency that I'm able to come to my own conclusions about my own cultural heritage and where it needs to improve. And that denial of agency, as I say, is a bigotry of low expectations. But it started with those words, Uncle Tom, native informant. Where did it end up? And this comes to the announcement that I made on Bill Maher's show. Where it ended up, perversely, is, as I say, I'm used to attacks from the right wing. In the United Kingdom, there is a Thomson Reuters well-checked database that they sell to banks and global corporations around the world, and it's a list effectively, right? And they've listed me there. They had done. Vice News broke this story. I was listed under the terrorism red category in this Thomson Reuters well-checked database. My lawyer sent them a letter. That's now subject to a dispute, which is going to be resolved. They're making some overtures to try and settle this. And so I'm used to that. I'm used to the right wing generalizing and stereotyping and categorizing somebody like me as a terrorist. I'm used to that. But you also have exactly the same thing happening from the left. So whereas in the UK I've been listed under the terrorism category in this well-checked database, here in the United States, a leftist organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, have listed me as an anti-Muslim extremist. And you can't win. People like me, we're caught in the middle. We've got on the one hand a rise of anti-Muslim populist sentiment. We've just had an attack in London against a mosque where a guy mimicked ISIS tactics, took a white van and mowed Muslims down in the streets. But, I'm expecting that. That's something I've grown up with. And yet now you've got these attacks from the hard left, a bit like the political horseshoe theory, They meet at the top with their authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And these guys have listed me as an anti-Muslim extremist. And that is absurd. A bunch of white people sitting in sweet Alabama, And I say white people deliberately because that's the identity politics game that they want to play. A bunch of white people sitting in sweet Alabama telling somebody like me who's been in the trenches, who's memorized half the Quran, who's learned classical Arabic so that I could better understand my religion, born to a Muslim family, raised a Muslim, that I'm suddenly an anti-Muslim extremist from their ivory tower in Alabama, which is where the SPLC is based. They haven't got a clue what it takes to work within communities to challenge this rhetoric. And so I decided on the Bill Maher show, I announced it, and Bill was very kind. He pledged and committed himself as well.
Well, the announcement was that you were going to sue them.
I said I'm going to crowdsource a campaign to sue the SPLC. In fact, my lawyer is coming to meet me immediately after this interview, just to update me. And Bill was kind enough on live national television on his show to shake my hand and say, let me be part of the crowd.
Wow.
And the campaign is going forward. We're going to crowdsource a fundraising campaign. We're going to do to the SPLC what they did to the KKK. Is what made them famous. They sued the KKK. They beat them for the KKK hate speech. And that's what made them so prominent. Well, they have become the monster, the Nietzschean beast that they claimed that they wanted to defeat. They were set up and they were meant to protect people like me, not stigmatize people like me by putting me on a list. And I'm more worried there are people out there who are more vulnerable, who don't have the access to the resources I have. And I'm worried about people like them, because what happens when you make lists like this? We talk about McCarthyism coming from the right wing. Well, imagine in a context of working in societies and countries where heresy and blasphemy is punished by death or worse, torture and then death. I've witnessed torture in Egyptian jails. You put people like me on a list, well, I'll tell you what happens, because in 2013, jihadists made a list of 84 so-called atheist and heretic thinkers in Bangladesh, a Muslim majority country. Within 3 years, 10 of them had been assassinated by jihadists. We talk a list, I think of, when you talk of lists, I think of Theo van Gogh, who was murdered in the Netherlands, to the right of me when it comes to politics, but come on, nobody deserves to be murdered in the streets like that. And the list they pinned to his body with a dagger listed Ayaan Hirsi Ali as the next victim. This is what happens when you put Muslims on lists and call them heretics or accuse them of speaking out of tone.
I wouldn't try to equate these two situations, but now we're seeing people like Dave Rubin called far-right, people like Sargon of Akkad called far-right. And recently, after I covered a rally in Portland, I was called an alt-right journalist. And I've never felt the need to talk about my personal politics until I started getting attacks from the left. So let me say this, right? Getting a bit more personal. In 2011, I slept at Occupy Wall Street, in the park.
Yeah.
This is how I got my start. I had no intention of being a journalist. I just want to go there and experience. My politics were kind of, we'll see what happens. I'm not, too left or right or anything. And I started documenting what was happening, and they cheered for me. They called it great immersion journalism.
Yeah.
But now, I went to dinner with Trump supporters, and they published an article calling me a journalist in quotes, and they said I was alt-right.
Yeah.
This is kind of a theme of several videos I've done over the past week where we're hearing that people who identify actually as center-left, because like I said, I never felt the need to talk about my politics, but I'm center-left libertarian, and they're calling me alt-right, they're calling other left-leaning liberals alt-right, because it's a way to discredit, it's a character assassination. The crazy thing is, like I said, they'll cheer for me when it supported their narrative. I don't think it's unique just to the left, like you were saying. You've experienced it from both sides, but it is a bit frustrating when you think.
Well, they were meant to be our allies. This is the problem, and that's why I call it treachery. And if a lot of great things has been achieved by the civil rights movement, by people that were seeking social justice, and unfortunately, all of those terms have now become pejoratives because of this behavior. And it's boy cried wolf. There are genuine anti-Muslim bigots out there. A guy just mowed Muslims down outside a mosque in Finsbury Park in London. But if you keep overusing these terms, racist, Islamophobe, anti-Muslim, extremist, then when there are genuine people like this Finsbury Park mosque attacker, when there are genuine anti-Muslim bigots out there, then nobody's going to take it seriously anymore, and that's what's happened.
It's like the boy who cried wolf, I suppose. You call everyone a white supremacist, everyone a Nazi, people need to realize that there actually are neo-Nazis and white supremacists who cause real problems.
This is the annoying thing, because think about it again, who suffers from that overusage? Those white dudes with the Southern Poverty Law Center in sweet Alabama, they're genuinely in Alabama. That's where they're based, right? And their overuse of the term anti-Muslim extremist against somebody like me, who suffers? I'm the guy who's been attacked by genuine far-right Nazis. I've been attacked by them, not these guys. And so, who suffers in the end by their overusage? Again, it comes down to those vulnerable communities. So they are letting down the very communities they claim to defend, because then nobody's going to take it seriously when those same communities are targeted by neo-Nazis.
Why do you think? Why is the Southern Poverty Law Center calling you an extremist? Why are they doing this attack? What do they have to gain from it?
With many human rights organizations, with many campaigners, with many with much of the left today, and that's why I've got a video up from my radio show. I have an LBC radio show in the UK on the weekends, and I have a video I puts up clips. One of them is that the left is no longer liberal, and I was speaking to Dave Rubin before my interview with Bill Maher, because he did a similar video about a month after that. But one of the reasons this has happened is that there has been an ideological infiltration by certain dogmatists who have pretty much entered into these organizations and taken their narrative over from within. And that's what we're witnessing. There is an ideological agenda at play. There is no concern or regard for where the truth may be, because actually, as long as your tribe is winning in its propaganda war, that's all that matters.
It's kind of like what I was saying earlier, that it's about their side winning.
Yeah.
So when you're on the wrong side, when you're on the left, the right hates you. When you're on the right, the left hates you.
Yeah. Right. And the only thing we can do in this time is stick firmly to our principles, universal liberal principles, and be consistent. It's important to be consistent. And I will continue campaigning in a consistent way for the values and the principles I believe in. And of course, it will be met with this kind of slander and defamation. But ultimately, the world has changed even in the 10 years since I've been running Quilliam. ISIS emerged, and unfortunately, it's become a lot easier to point to the consequences of the Islamist ideology and say, you talk about hate speech leading to violence? Well, there you are. If you've got X amount of people running around calling for theocracy, then in the end, don't be surprised when somebody actually establishes that theocracy and claims to rule in God's name.
It was something really fascinating happened recently. They did this anti-Sharia law protest across the U.S. You may have heard of. I went down to San Bernardino, and I saw all of there was the Trump supporting side that tended to be anti-Sharia law, and then the Antifa side, which was typically pro-Islam free religion. And I talked to some people from Antifa, and I asked them if they were opposed to Sharia law. They all said yes. And I went to the Trump side and I said, are you opposed to fascism? They all said yes. So this is what strikes me as just so odd, that both sides, they genuinely agree on their core issues, but maybe misunderstand each other, or for some reason just want to fight.
I think that's the last point there, is people are looking for an enemy. And it's very sad. People, unfortunately, some people feel relevant when they find somebody to hate. And that tendency, I grew up, as I said, facing that from the far right wing, right, neo-Nazis. And I plead with my brothers and sisters on the left of politics that let's not become the Nietzschean beast we claim we wanted to defeat, right? But that's what's happened. Those same tendencies, that same desire to shut down debate, to silence people, to call people names that we disagree with, to seek out an enemy just to have somebody to hate, has emerged on the hard left as well. And look, the assumption is made that political violence, hatred, bigotry, and political violence stems from neo-Nazis who are far right, okay? And yet, look at what's happening in the US these days. James T. Hodgkinson has just tried to assassinate Republican Congress people and their staff, claiming he's a Bernie Sanders fan and liking the SPLC page on Facebook. Now, clearly Bernie's disavowed him, but the point being that this is a political terrorist who's emerged from the hard left.
We also have the Antifa.
The Berkeley riots.
The bike lock basher, they call him.
That's
allegedly,
right.
That's Eric Clanton. I don't know if it's 100% confirmed.
And in Middlebury College, and what happened there with Charles Murray, has been listed by the SPLC as a white nationalist speaker. His sins are he's a centre-right speaker. And the Democrat professor, Alison Stagger, I think it is. Professor Alison something, correct the pronunciation of her surname, but she's a Democrat professor who invited Charles Murray to Middlebury College so that the students could hear and debate with somebody that she disagreed with on his politics. Violence erupted. She suffered a concussion, a Democrat professor. This is what's going on. So we've got to, they are becoming, this phenomenon is becoming the beast it claims it wanted to defeat. And currently therefore I say we're faced with a triple threat. The triple threat is, you've got the regressive left on one side, you've got the sort of hard right anti-Muslim stuff that I grew up with, that it used to be actually racial. It's no longer racial. It's now, it's like about mowing down Muslims outside mosques. And then you've got the threat from the heavens above, which is the theocrats. And that triple threat, we've got to keep that at the forefront of our minds when resisting this. In proportion to each other, of course, global jihadism is the biggest threat. That's something that has to be said. Jihadist terrorism is still the biggest threat globally to our world security and stability. But let's not forget that at the end of the day, Western societies have a history of going hard right and hard left, not just hard right, and so ultimately, if you're in the concentration camps of Hitler or in the gulags of Stalin, what difference does it make that one claimed to be left wing or one, what difference does it make?
It's authoritarianism.
Exactly. So that triple threat has to be resisted, and I believe the best way to resist it is to reinforce our universal liberal values. And I'm going to begin in defense of those values by pushing back against people like the SPLC, who are attempting not only to shut debate down by listing me as an anti-Muslim extremist, but actually endangering voices like mine, and therefore acting as a disincentive for voices like mine to emerge. And so for that reason, it's important for the cause that they are dealt a lesson. They cannot get away with this with impunity, endangering people's lives and shutting down the debate in this way. Defamation laws exist for a reason, and if there is any reason for them to exist, it exists so that you cannot tell lies about people and endanger their lives in this way. And I'm asking everybody, your viewers and beyond, to support us in our crowdfunding sourced campaign to push back against the slander of the SPLC and the regressive left.
Right on. Well, thanks for meeting. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
All right.
So for those of you who just watched, thank you all so much for hanging out. I'm going to be heading back to New York soon, but if you like the video, click the like button, comment below, and let me know what you think, because honestly, I think we could talk for another 3 hours, but we don't have that much time. But let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Subscribe for new videos every day at 4 p.m. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. And do you have any social media?
So the campaign for the fundraising campaign, I'm saying support our campaign to bring justice against the SPLC, who are slandering activists like myself and others who are campaigning against cultural relativism and for the universality of liberal values. MaajidNawaz.com is where we're going to try and raise funds for this lawsuit against the SPLC, and that's MAAJIDNAWAZ, or Z as Americans say, .com. You can probably put the text of that.
Yeah, I'll put that in there so people can see it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
I'll see you all tomorrow at 4 p.m.